All right, hello and welcome back to another Dragon Plus live stream with me as he is wont to do every other episode is Jeremy Crawford. Jeremy Crawford as lead designer of the Player's Handbook and the lead rules designer of Dungeons and Dragons. Welcome back.
Thank you. Always good to be here. I am just barely dodging this dragon's fire at the moment. This Githzerai is using his psionic powers to protect me.
And I am boarding an Eberron ship so that I can fly off to this terrifying skull castle behind me.
Yes, I think Skeletor is hanging out in there. That is Skeletor's winter palace in Eberron.
One thing I never understood about He-Man was Skeletor was a skeleton, yet was as muscle-bound as He-Man. Was he just a skeleton of a face, and the rest of him was, skin and muscle?
It is possible the skull was a mask and the body was real, or maybe he was just skeleton and the body was just a muscle suit.
I like that. So for folks that are tuning in, we are going to be returning to the topic at hand that we touched upon last week with Jeremy. We started to dive into the most recent Unearthed Arcana columns, and we ended on the Psionic Options Revisited that were released as a PDF on April 14th. So as mentioned, we do have many of the questions that came in during chat during the live stream to get through. We also want to dive in a bit more to the actual material itself. But before we do, again, we wanted to let folks know, speaking of virtual backgrounds on the D&D website, we've been maintaining the stay-at-home, play-at-home program page for folks during this time. As of yesterday, we've added some, I think we have to call them general backgrounds that are suitable for Zoom conferencing, not necessarily Zoom backgrounds. But in yesterday's release of free material, we dropped our first batch of backgrounds suitable for Zoom with a bit of an Eberron theme. This is one of the ones that I'm using. Jeremy looks like he's wrangled some art from a previous source book as well.
This is from Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes.
Yes, I remember the Gith Yankee and Githzerai fight that we live streamed at on one occasion. So, in any case, we do hope that folks are staying safe, and we are pleased as always that you're taking the time out of your schedule to tune in. If you do have any questions regarding today's material or anything in general, please do put it in chat. Please do preface it with a question. If we don't get to it immediately, we do compile and go through all of the questions at a later date. But before we get into the questions, Jeremy, how are you doing, sir? How is this is week 7 for work from home for us here in Seattle? How are you hanging in there?
Wait, are we really up to week 7?
This is midway through week 7.
Oh my gosh. So this has just become so much the new normal for me that I have completely lost track of how long we have been doing this. So my days are not a whole lot different from when they were before the quarantine, in that I spend most of my days working on D&D. The big difference is I'm at home instead of at the office. But thankfully, I still get to see you and the rest of the team, thanks to how we're connected through technology. But I am starting to miss, real face-to-face interaction. Our daily walks that we have outside definitely help to, stretch our legs and be reminded there's a world out there. Otherwise, sort of here in my D&D study, just working away.
Well, hang in there, and to everyone else, please do hang in there as well. Things that you might be. Last, I failed on my homework assignment. My homework assignment was to touch base on Final Fantasy VII redo, but I did not. I failed utterly.
Oh my goodness.
I know,
That
knee deep in Fortnite, and starting to watch devs on the FX, which was a bit captivating. But, things you are reading, watching, playing these days?
so first, before I get to stuff I'm doing, I'm not sure I mentioned in our episode last week that there is a free demo for the Final Fantasy
Oh,
VII remake. So
okay.
so you have zero cost associated with trying it out, other than the time, of course. And it was playing the demo that's what got me to get the game. It captivated me right away. As for what I'm playing, I'm continuing to make my way through Final Fantasy VII. I think I'm on chapter 13 now. There are 18 chapters in the game, so I'm hoping to wrap that up sometime in the coming week. Haven't watched much TV since you and I last talked on this show, other than watching an episode or two of the new Amazing Stories series, which
Oh,
is one of the programs on Apple's new
mm,
streaming service. And so far, it's very well done. Steven Spielberg's the executive producer. I don't know if you ever saw the old Amazing Stories TV show,
I
and
did.
this is a revival of that show.
I still remember the episode of the guy who was too drawn into his TV programming, and they kept coming out of the screen and invading his life. Yeah, no, that is the one streaming platform I think we don't have in this household. Uh, Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, Disney Plus, ESPN Plus. It's all there. So
Yeah.
yes, we've been going through. Devs is quite good. Community dropped to Netflix. Schitt's Creek we never watched. That is now a binge-worthy show for us. 000 on Amazon. I'm starting to get into. So yeah, it does.
There, I mean, actually, having more evenings at home than before the quarantine has certainly driven home how many shows there are to watch. Because I in a typical week don't watch a whole lot of TV, but sometimes I get in the mood, but I'll only be able to like sort of see a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But now with more time, some of these weeks, I'm like, my gosh, there are all these shows.
And of quality. I mean,
Yes.
might not all be grand slams, but a lot of them are certainly home runs or a double at least.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, you and I are of an era where you got ABC, NBC, and CBS, and you got the programming you got, hit or miss.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
If you were lucky, NBC would run a V mini series, which was the height of content at the time.
Oh my God. Now I'm gonna be thinking of lizard people.
Well, let me put my money where my mouth is and actually get to some of the questions that folks had written in with last time in chats, so that we do actually cover them. So again, we're going to get into the Unearthed Arcana Psionic Options Revisited a little bit more into depth. But some of the questions that came in during chat last time, and I'll just go through the top of the order here. Astronomyfer, Astronomy furry. I'm going to mispronounce all of that.
Many of these screen names were never meant to be said out loud.
No, it's a clever take on astronomer, and I'm butchering it completely. However, they ask, how are you guys handling the action economy balance of the summoning spells? And we talked a little bit about the summoning abilities last time. Summon the bestial spirit is cool, but can it compete with pulling out 8 challenge rating 1/8s?
So, as I mentioned last time, most of the summoning spells that are currently in the game's books require a minute or more, and so most of them don't see use in the midst of combat. Now, of course, if you've summoned the creature outside combat, then you get to benefit from its assistance once battle starts. Now, one of the big exceptions to this is the Conjure Animal spells in the player's handbook. That spell is one action. And so druids and others who have access to that spell can, on the spot, summon up some nature spirits to take the form of animals and assist them in the heat of battle. Now, one of the ways that the new Summon Bestial Spirit spell sort of is balanced with Conjure Animals in existence is difference in level, and also the creature itself that you get with the Bestial Spirit is generally better than many of the animals that you can summon. That all said, there are going to be certain circumstances where having a bunch of critters will simply be more powerful than having one. And so there will be situational differences between the two. And if Summon Bestial Spirit makes it into print, we will certainly do some careful fine tuning to make sure it is an appealing option for its level in a game that also has Conjure Animals.
Okay. And this question just came in today as well, but I saw it from last time. And this one, I think I can pronounce because it's Black Ace 13, unless the XIII are actually meant to be pronounced. But they ask, does Psionic Recovery make the die usable again?
All right, so now we're diving into our Unearthed Arcana, and so by Psionic Recovery, I am assuming they're referring to the feature that's called Psi Replenishment. And if that is in fact what they're talking about, yes, Psi Replenishment does give you access to your psionic talent die, even if it has been expended because you rolled a 4 on a d4. So Psi Replenishment is a way for you to get your die back. But you can do that only once per day. You get to, focus your mind, use this bonus action, and get your die back. And we put that in, by the way, because after testing it out and whatnot, we needed to make sure there was a way to get the die back at least once if you happen to have a horrible run of luck and just burn through your die in your first few rolls.
So this is in relation to the Psi Knight and their psionic talent. So I know we're going to be diving into some of these subclasses a little bit more.
Yeah. So again, they must have meant the feature called Psi Replenishment.
And well, let's talk about something that is not in Psionic Options Revisited. Ekame asks, Psionic Blast was a cool spell for wizards and warlocks. Is there a reason why it was removed?
Yes. If we present something in Unearthed Arcana that later doesn't make it into one of our books, and in this case, we actually did the rare thing of letting people know that something didn't even make it to the next round of Unearthed Arcana. That is usually because it didn't score high enough in satisfaction for us to go further with it. When it comes to Psionic Blast, it actually scored just okay. So by our standards, it didn't fail, but it also barely passed. And when we looked at the feedback, we saw that the spell actually had enough overlap with other effects in the game, especially with also now accounting for spells in Explorer's Guide to Wildmount, that we decided not to pursue it. One of the things that was fascinating that came up with Psionic Blast is a number of playtesters were confusing it with the Mind Flayer's Mind Blast and expecting it to work the same way, even though they don't have the same name. We just decided to move on because the effect we were able to replicate elsewhere in the game. And that was true with all of the spells in the Psionics Revisited article. All of the ones that we mentioned that we're not moving forward with at this time, it's usually because they didn't score spectacularly when it comes to satisfaction from playtesters, or they had enough overlap with things already in the game that there wasn't a whole lot of motivation for us to continue on with them. Because with spells, we're often looking for new ones to fill a functional or story gap in the game, and it's very hard to justify potentially adding a spell eventually to the game as an official add-on if it's basically doing something very close to what another spell is doing, or a particular class's features might be doing. We generally are looking for it to fill some kind of gap in the game. Like that, sometimes that's as simple as, oh, we realized we don't have enough spells that deal psychic damage, for instance. That was actually on our minds when we did the spells for Xanathar's Guide to Everything. There are a number of spells there that are filling gaps that we identified in the game. And that is one of the reasons why a couple of Unearthed Arcanas ago, we had a odd acid spell mixed in with some summoning spells. It's because actually we realized we needed some more acid options in the game.
And not in our normal day-to-day life.
Yes, please. Yeah, no acid in our everyday life.
We've got enough to worry about here.
Yeah.
We've got a couple more questions. I'll just roll through these before we get into a bit of a discussion. Max Zimenez asks, none of the psionic abilities from the recent Unearthed Arcana seem to be keyed to any ability score. Do you have any intention of doing so with future Unearthed Arcanas? I would imagine most people associate psionics with intelligence, even if the psionic wizard and mystic are scrapped.
So if you think about other types of supernatural power in D&D, most of them are not associated with a particular ability score. For instance, we have sorcerers and wizards who both wield what in the D&D multiverse is referred to as arcane power, and wizards do it with their intelligence, and sorcerers do it with their charisma. You see this, again, throughout the game, where there are different ability scores associated, even sometimes with the same source of power. So when it comes to the Psionic Options Revisited article, there is some variation. The Psi Knight uses intelligence. The Soulknife actually doesn't have any particular ability associated with their psionic talent. The Psionic Soul Sorcerer uses charisma, as is normal for a sorcerer. And then if you look at the new feats that were in this most recent Unearthed Arcana, you'll see there that you have a number of ability options, and they tend to be either what we think of as mental abilities or physical abilities. So in some of these feats, you choose if your psionic power is associated with, say, your intelligence, wisdom, or charisma, or in the case of the metabolic control feat, you decide if it is associated with your strength, dexterity, or constitution. The idea here is that psionic power might, for a particular person, be a manifestation of a powerful intellect, but it could also be a manifestation of really strong emotion. It could be a manifestation of what in some stories is just referred to as heart. And here I don't mean the organ, the heart, but sort of your spirit, your soul. Or in the case of metabolic control, you have tapped into psionic power in your very body. And we went this direction rather than tying it all to intellect, or, again, the score name, intelligence, because in stories of people who have psychic abilities, it manifests in very different ways. If you think, some of them, if you think of a character like Professor X, he is sort of a classic, big brain character. But you have other characters with psychic abilities where their psionic manifestations are much more emotional. When they get angry or sad, then often that's, or happy or joyful, that's often what triggers their power to manifest.
Yeah, I mean, Kylo Ren comes to mind as somebody from an anger perspective that might manifest some of the strength and psionic abilities.
Yeah,
To make
yeah,
that,
yeah. Because the Jedi are another example of characters in non D&D fiction who have abilities that could be described as psionic.
let me ask one more before we dive into the material itself. And this one came from Twitter, Ukulele Emblem. Last live stream, you mentioned whenever possible, we repurpose design in regards to the Psi Wizard, among other ideas. Was the Star Druid's starry form inspired by the Psi Wizard's thought form?
So I wouldn't say the starry form was inspired by the thought form, but there was definitely parallel design going on. Sometimes we will be working on things and we'll have an idea that we're interested in exploring, and we might explore it in parallel in several different manifestations. And so we were interested in exploring this sort of transformative feature where the spellcaster takes on this new form. We explored it in both the Psionics Wizard and in the Circle of the Stars for the Druid. How those two are connected is that internally, after looking at the playtest feedback, we decided to step away from the Psionics Wizard, which then made us confident to move forward with the starry form for the Circle of the Stars. Because if we had seen the playtest feedback for the Psionics Wizard and it looked like, oh, we're going to move forward with this, then it would be less likely for us to do a very similar feature in the Circle of the Stars. But by that point, we were already pretty sure the Psionics Wizard wasn't going to make it. And so we're like, all right, we'll move forward with the starry form in the Circle of the Stars.
Okay, that is many of the questions that had come in last time. So we thought we would do a little bit of a deeper dive into the material itself. Jeremy, you wanted to discuss a bit of the subclasses class by class, I believed. And again, for folks that are tuning in, please do keep those questions coming, and we'll compile those as we go, either for now or for a future live stream. So where should we begin? For folks that are following along at home, we've got Psionic Options Revisited, and we have, I believe, 3 subclasses that were discussed in this PDF.
How about we start at the top with the fighter subclass, the Psi Knight. So all 3 of these subclasses are revisions of subclasses that we've shared in Unearthed Arcana in recent months. The Psi Knight is a revision of the Psychic Warrior, a subclass that was out a number of Unearthed Arcana installments ago. Right away, people will see we changed the name. We changed it largely because playtest feedback came in and there was some confusion about why was this thing called a psychic warrior. And again, psychic not only has an English meaning, but in D&D it's also associated with psychic damage, when this subclass is much more about telekinetic abilities rather than dealing psychic damage to people. It was a fair thing to bring up. It was a blind spot for us because when we did the first version of the subclass, we were picking up a name from an earlier edition of the game. That's where the Psychic Warrior came from. And we're really using the word psychic in its English sense, because the word in English can just refer to basically any kind of mental power. And so we thought, oh, this is a fair comment. This subclass really isn't about what D&D calls psychic damage. And so we are exploring a new name, the Psi Knight, which is pretty straightforward. It is a fighter who is channeling Psi, which is the psionic power. And we chose the word knight partly because we've been doing this a little bit with the fighter. We have the Eldritch Knight in the player's handbook, and we recently did the Rune Knight, and it just sounded cool. So we'll see what people think. It's a part of the playtest process, especially when we get feedback on names. Then we see, well, does the new name stick, or do we continue to iterate? Now, when it comes to the abilities themselves, some of the Psychic Warrior's abilities from the previous Unearthed Arcana still exist here, but not in their original form. And one of the big reasons for that is our decision, and I mentioned this in the previous episode, to come up with a mechanic that all of these subclasses would have that would give them something in common as psionic characters. Because one of the pieces of playtest feedback we got was, hey, these subclasses are really cool, but it would be even cooler if there was something mechanically connecting them, where if, whichever one you played, they would do something at the table beyond just the feel of it. I mean, because of course we were already, they already had like telepathy and telekinetic abilities, etc. So beyond the effects themselves, some game mechanic that would make them feel like they had something in common. And so we developed this psionic talent die, which is this die you roll for certain psionic abilities, and the die can get bigger and also smaller, representing an ebb and flow of your power and a certain amount of uncertainty, because I thought it would be fun as a person playing one of these characters to have almost this mini game you're playing of like, all right, is my psionic power going to swell, or is it going to start diminishing? And have that feed into some of your decision making as you decide which features to use at different points in an adventure. Now, each of the three subclasses gets a feature called psionic talent, which is the feature that supplies them with this psionic talent die. Now, even though each of them have a feature with the same name, the thing they have in common is simply this is where they get the psionic talent die. If you then dig into the meat of each of these features, they're radically different because in each case, they're able to do different things with that psionic talent die. So the die represents the raw psionic power that they have, but then they get to use that power in different ways. So in the case of the Psi Knight, that power at third level can be used to create protective fields, to shield people, can be used to make psi-powered leaps. This was something we added in because people, when giving us playtest feedback on the Psychic Warriors, said, hey, how come I can't use my telekinetic abilities to make, super-powered leaps? So we added that in. And then there is also the ability to use the die to make telekinetic strikes. We were very mindful about making sure there was an offensive option, a defensive option, and then an option that was not necessarily combat related, because the psi-powered leap could be useful not only in combat, but also in parts of an adventure when the characters are simply exploring. Like, hey, Psi Knight, can you leap up there and check that area out that the rest of us can't reach? And so this is the the collection of options the Psi Knight has up front before then getting their next batch of psionic abilities starting at 7th level. Now, one thing I'll say about the psionic talent die before I move on is the unusualness of it, in that a lot of D&D things you always want to roll high. And we preserve that with the psionic talent die, in that if you roll high, the immediate result will be good. Like if you are doing a telekinetic strike and your psionic talent die is a d6 and you roll a 6, you're happy because you just dealt more damage than if you had, say, rolled a 1.
Right.
But the twist that is special about the psionic talent die, because we want it to represent the ebb and flow of your power, is that if you roll the highest number on the die, so on a d6, if you roll a 6, what happens there is, yeah, you just did a cool thing, but you also just spent a little too much of your power, and so the die then drops one size. So it goes from, if it was a d6, it goes to a d4. Now, the opposite is also true. If, let's say, you roll the die and you get a 1, and this is true no matter what the die's size is, if you roll a 1 on it, you're kind of bummed because I only did 1 more. You know, if you're doing telekinetic strike, in the case of the Psi Knight, I did a whopping 1 force damage to the person. But because in that expenditure of power, you manage to actually conserve some, the die now increases in size. So then the next time, instead of rolling, if it was a d6, the next time you get to roll a d8. Now that's assuming that the starting size of your die is a d8, because the die can never get bigger than your starting size. That's a question I've seen come up on Twitter, and so I want to make sure that's clear to everybody. Your die can never increase past its starting size, which is one of the reasons why it's then so cool when you reach higher levels and your die starts getting bigger. You know, when you get to 5th level, it becomes a d8. When you hit 11th level, it becomes a d10. 17th level, you're rolling a d12. So, you know, and which means then a d12 is the biggest the die can ever become.
I like the idea that it's not the die type that changes in size. It's the actual physical size of the die that you're using. So
yes, I'm now rolling a d6.
the results are still going to be the same, but it's a bigger die and it's more impressive.
Yes. Yeah.
It's an interesting mechanic. It's making my head spin in a good way, and I'm thinking for no other reason than playing games. You can imagine why lately. Playing games with kids, as I'm doing now, it's an interesting rollover mechanic to say to them, "Hey, sometimes you roll a 1, sometimes you roll a 20." To soften the blow, if you choose to go down that road, as opposed to, hey, let the die fall where it may. If you choose to go down the road of, well, you rolled low this time, but you didn't expend your effort, so you're going to be able to have a little bit more effort left in the tank and get a bonus on a future die roll. It seems like there's an applicability that is very useful here, but in other areas.
Yeah, and that feeling that you just described is exactly what I'm wanting us to explore. And you know, who knows? This could be a kind of thing we could explore elsewhere in the game, perhaps at another time. But right now, I felt it was a really neat way to express your power ebbing and flowing. We'll see. We'll see what playtesters say. If they dig it, I hope people do. I think it's fun, but hey, I like rolling dice. And honestly, I think often uncertainty is fun. There are plenty of things in the game too that will give you certainty, but one of the reasons why D&D uses so many dice is you get to be surprised. Even
Right.
even the DM gets to be surprised because you don't know what that die is going to show you.
It could be an epic success. It could be an epic failure. Even the epic failures, though, have good, memorable moments of their own. So,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
which is a different
So,
lesson.
yes. So when it comes to leveling up as a Psi Knight, of course, at 7th level, you then get the Psionic Thrust ability, which now when you use Telekinetic Strike means you have a chance to knock the person prone because of the telekinetic force that hits them, or you have the ability to move them 10 feet in any direction horizontally. That means you could use this to draw them closer to yourself, to hurl them away. And in this theme of telekinesis, at 7th level, the Psi Knight also gets the ability to move a creature and object with their mind. This is sort of like levitation, and in fact, a little view behind the curtain. Initially, we had this as just using the levitate spell, but the closer we got to releasing the Unearthed Arcana, we realized we wanted this to be more specific for the Psi Knight and to have the flexibility that you see here. At 10th level, you get a Psi enhanced metabolism, letting you resist some certain types of damage and to be immune to the poisoned condition. And then you have the Bulwark of Force, which lets you protect people. This is very similar to an ability that was in the Psychic Warrior in its previous version, but it is now allowing you to use your psionic talent die to give yourself more uses of it if you want. And then finally, the subclass culminates in the knight being able to cast the telekinesis spell, but to do so by means of their psionic power. So when they cast this spell, it requires no verbal or somatic or material components, and they are using their psionic talent die to fuel the use of this spell. So when they use it, their die then automatically decreases by 1 die size. It's almost sort of like a spell slot you're spending, but in this case, you are burning your die. So you could, if your die at this point was a D12, you could just turn it to a D8 and cast telekinesis. And if anyone hasn't read the telekinesis spell in the player's handbook, it is a juicy spell. There is a lot you can do with it. And this is actually a pretty high level spell for this fighter to be able to toy around with. But we sort of felt, if this subclass is all about telekinesis, it would be a big miss if they were unable to actually access the telekinesis spell.
I'm looking it up now on handy dandy D&D Beyond.
You're like, oh, what can I do with this juicy magic?
It is not just prestidigitation plus.
Oh no.
You're talking about moving objects up to 1,000 pounds,
Yes.
up to 30 feet in any direction.
Yeah.
Huge or smaller creatures. So yeah, it is a juicy spell.
I mean, because this is any story where you've seen somebody use their mind power to like hold up a bridge or hurl a massive statue across the room, that kind of thing. That's what the telekinesis spell is all about in D&D. It is mighty magic. Shall we go into the Soulknife?
Yes, I'm looking at him now. So that is the Psi Knight, but the second subclass was for the Rogue, and that is the Soulknife. So how to discuss the Soulknife?
All right, so the Soulknife is the one subclass in this article who did not get a new name. It was called the Soulknife the last time people saw it. The name of this one did not cause any static in the playtest feedback, and it's also a name we adopted going back a couple of editions ago. And right away, just like in the Psi Knife, the Soulknife gets the psionic talent feature. But this time, rather than having, the telekinetic leaps and strikes and, telekinetic barriers, the Soul Knife, being a rogue who is all about using their psionic powers for infiltration and whatnot, they are able to use their psionic power, one, to create a sort of mini telepathic network with people using their psychic whispers ability, because we thought soul knives as rogues would be sought after in certain places in the D&D multiverse, because wouldn't you want an infiltration group that never has to utter a word to each other because they are all whispering to each other telepathically? So that was the story idea behind this psychic whispers feature. And then they also have this feature called Psi Bolstered Knack. Now, a big part of being a rogue is not only sneak attack, which is often what people think of because of combat in the game, but another major part of being a rogue is being amazingly skillful. Rogues typically have more proficiencies than anybody else in a group. They have all sorts of tools at their disposal for getting out of tricky situations. And so the idea here is that the Soul Knife is this person who, with their strange mind powers, is able to turn failure into success. So what this lets you do is, if you fail an ability check using a skill or tool with which you have proficiency, you can roll your psionic talent die, add it to the check, and potentially turn that failure into a success. So you can imagine, this rogue trying to unlock a door, and the DM tells them, well, you failed. Well, then, the rogue, they uses their mind powers, and then they're like, I succeeded.
But did I?
because they're able to use the shine of their psychic abilities to figure something out about the lock that their mundane abilities didn't at first notice.
The tumblers happened to fall into place, whether or not my pick was just stymied.
Yeah. Now, this feature, the Psi Bolstered Knack, is intentionally very broad. It applies to any skill or tool that the rogue has proficiency with. So this also could apply to, say, persuasion or deception. The Soul Knife might be infiltrating a masquerade ball and might be trying to deceive people about their identity. And let's say the DM asks the Soul Knife to make a deception check, and then the DM after the roll tells them they failed. Well, again, maybe the Soul Knife decides to lean into their psionic ability and somehow manipulate the social situation, and if they roll well enough on their psionic talent die, turn that failure into a success. And suddenly, because of using their psychic abilities, that guard who was about to disbelieve the Soul Knife's lie suddenly believes it. So again, there are all sorts of ways that the Psi Bolstered Knack can be used to really flavor some scenes in D&D in interesting ways. Now, we get to the ability that gives the Soul Knife their name, and that is their psychic blades, their ability to manifest psychic daggers or short swords, however you want to imagine them. But while other rogues are usually relying on a physical finesse weapon or ranged weapon, soul knives typically rely on these psychic blades that they manifest. And I love the scariness of this. I even made sure we put into the flavor text this idea that some thieves guilds and monarchs and others love having soul knife assassins because there are no wounds left behind when a person is damaged by a blade made out of pure psionic energy. And
investigate that. There's no
yes.
murder weapon. There's no wound. How?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And these blades have the finesse and thrown properties, meaning, because of the finesse, meaning they do work with the rogue's sneak attack ability. And because it has the thrown property, it means you can also hurl them. And so if the rogue wants to throw these blades made out of psychic energy, they can do so. And we've pointed out that these blades do immediately vanish, so no one can pick up your psychic blade and throw it back at you. We have also built in the ability for you to make a bonus action attack with your psychic blades. This is essentially a replacement for the 2-weapon fighting rule in the combat chapter. We didn't want the Soulknife to have to loop through that rule, and so we built an alternative to it right into the psychic blades. Part of the reason why it wouldn't actually work to loop through the 2-weapon fighting rule is that rule is built assuming the person using it is holding weapons in their hands, whereas the Soulknife is not holding these in their hands. They manifest as you attack and then vanish, and so they simply wouldn't work with the regular rule. And we also wanted to do something different. These allow you to add your ability score modifier to the damage of this bonus attack, unlike the 2-weapon fighting rule in the combat chapter of the player's handbook. But in this case, the die size is different. So normally, the psychic blades have a d6, whereas if you do this bonus action attack, they have a d4. Now, the 9th level feature of the Soulknife, it's called Soul Blades, builds on your Psychic Blades feature from level 3. The first is the Homing Strikes. Again, we go to this theme of the Soulknife able to turn failure into success. So just as the Psi bolstered knack back at 3rd level let you turn a failed ability check potentially into a success if you roll high enough on your psionic talent die. This allows you to do the same kind of thing, but with an attack roll. So if you miss, you can roll your psionic talent die, add the number you rolled to the attack roll, and which then might cause that miss to instead hit your target. Now, if you do hit, your psionic talent die decreases in size regardless of the number you rolled. We put this in here because we realized if we didn't, this would actually be too good, because if you had really good luck on your psionic talent die and it didn't ever drop, you could just turn miss into hit after miss into hit after miss into hit, just keep going and going and going. So this ensures that you do lose some of your psionic power if you manage to cause this strike that was about to go over there to suddenly home in and hit the person.
A couple quick questions that have been coming in as we've been talking about the psychic blades. First, could a monk deflect a psychic blade thrown at them?
That's a good question. Ask me the other one. I'm going to look at the exact wording of the monk's deflect missiles ability.
The second question being, could they penetrate anti-magic protection if the psychic blade is different than a magic blade?
So the psychic blades feature specifically says that the blades are magic blades.
Okay, so they are still deflected by anti-magic abilities.
Sure.
Okay.
Yes, they are. I said it that way because I am endlessly fascinated by how many questions come up about anti-magic field, a spell which the typical campaign will never see in use. And by the way, this has been true for multiple editions of D&D. We have actually at the office have talked for years about the fact that few spells get as much conversation relative to how often they're used as anti-magic field. Because if you go on the internet, you'd like, let's say someone were visiting from Mars and they knew nothing about Dungeons and Dragons, and they just went to forums and Reddit and Twitter and thought, let's just see what this game is about. They would leave thinking that, man, every session of D&D must include a casting of the anti-magic field because of the amount of discussion surrounding that spell. Now, I think the reason for it is the spell poses some interesting metaphysical questions, and many of us who love D&D love it because of the world building that is not only explicit in D&D but also implicit. And so I think a lot of the anti-magic field fascination is ultimately a fascination with D&D world building. And so I sympathize with it while also being amused by it, because it's like, again, wowzers, this is a lot of conversation about something that the typical session will never see.
Now that's a challenge accepted. If somebody can craft, that scenario where either the NPC is protected by an anti-magic spear and you can't otherwise get to them, or some trick or trap that you have to manipulate is protected by an anti-magic spear. How do you get through it? So yes, chat was also, and I saw this as well, the way that you've got your Zoom background, it looked like you were pulling your book out of the head of the red dragon behind you. Materialized.
Yes.
It has that like slight green.
So in the Psychic Blade, this is going back to the deflect missiles question. The monk would not be able to catch it because we specify that the blade vanishes immediately after it hits or misses its target. Whereas in deflect missiles, you can use your reaction to deflect or catch the missile when you are hit by a ranged weapon attack. So it's essentially the instant the monk is hit, the Psychic Blade has vanished.
But what if the monk is wearing gauntlets crafted out of anti-magic sphere material?
So the moment we actually create such gauntlets, I will ask that question. I mean, I'll answer that question.
Wow, fair enough. Firm but fair.
Now the monk can still deflect, in other words, use the damage reduction part of deflect missiles. But again, there's just the monk can't actually catch it because as soon as they put their hand around it, it's gone.
All righty. So that is the Soulknife. I waylaid the conversation by the time we got to the 9th level power. We have not gone through the 13th or 17th level powers.
All right, so
Veil and Rend Mind.
The 9th level one, though, before we move on, also includes the ability to throw one of your psychic blades and teleport to the place where you throw it. Honestly, this was a bit I put in here simply because I thought it was cool. so I hope playtesters think so. One of the reasons why I was enchanted by the idea is, again, this notion of Soulknives being great at infiltration. And so really what I was imagining was, sure, this has combat uses, but I was actually more enchanted by the non-combat uses, like trying to sneak into a guard tower and hurling one of these knives up at like a window and then teleporting up there. Again, just neat narrative and exploration possibilities. The Psionic Veil, very similar to something that was in the Soulknife before, which is poof, we're invisible, and then they have the ability to stab directly into a target's mind with their psychic blades and stun the person. So we only have 5 minutes left and we have a whole other subclass to go through, the Psionic Soul. The one thing I'll say about the Psionic Soul right away, and this was previously the Aberrant Mind, is the Psionic Soul got really positive playtest feedback from before. So a lot of the Aberrant Mind's core functionality is present here in the Psionic Soul, but now using the Psionic Talent die. We've also been asked on Twitter and elsewhere why the removal of the aberrant flavoring. A big part of that was we had a number of people in the playtest feedback say, we love this subclass, but do we have to have so much mucus and tentacles if we want to get these psionic powers? And our answer was no. There was actually nothing inherent to the abilities of the Aberrant Mind that required tentacles and mucus. And so what we did is we took the core functionality, preserved it, and then presented an array of aesthetic and story options for your psionic origin. And so I would encourage people who still want some juicy flavor for the Psionic Soul Sorcerer's psionic power, take a look at the Psionic Origins table. If you loved the tentacles and mucus from the Aberrant Mind, we have got you covered with option number 7, which is you were implanted with a mind flayer tadpole, but the ceremorphosis never completed. And now the psionic power is yours. When you use it, your flesh shines with a strange mucus. And you will see that in each of these origin options, we've not only given you a story suggestion for the origination of your psionic power, but we often also give a flavor suggestion for how your psionic powers manifest. So in that case, this person who survived mind flare ceremorphosis, they're shining with mucus, but it could also be that you have option 2, where a psychic wind from the astral plane carried psionic energy into your being. When you use your powers now, faint motes of light sparkle around you. But if tentacles are your jam, because again, we've actually got you covered twice if you liked the Aberrant Mind, you can go with option 1. You were exposed to the far realm's warping influence. You can now use your mind in ways you never thought possible, and you're also convinced that a tendril is growing upon you. We will leave it to you where that tendril is manifesting, and we'll also leave it to you to decide whether it's real or not. We purposefully left it here that maybe it is a hallucination, maybe you do in fact have such a thing growing from you. So we created an array of options, all of them pointing at wherever this power came from, you now have extraordinary psionic ability. And it is extraordinary because not only do you have the features that are in the subclass, including a psionic talent feature, just as the Psi Knight and Soulknife have a psionic talent feature, but the Psionic Soul Sorcerer also has access to the entire Sorcerer spell list and is able to marry their psionic ability to the capabilities of that list and use their psionic power to manifest the effects represented by those spells. And so we can get into that more in our next episode.
Yes, let's. The mucus and tentacles. There you have. What a fine thought to lead with. So yes, we will return, if not next week, then the week after. We'll figure out that scheduling and we'll continue the conversation about the psionic options revisited. I know folks have been adding in questions along the way. So again, we'll be compiling those and getting to those next time. So again, we'd like to thank everyone for taking an hour out of your day to spend it with Jeremy and myself. This is the Dragon Plus live stream. So speaking of Dragon Plus, we're going to have that next issue out, I believe, on Monday for sure. We're going to be talking in its digital pages with Jeremy as well regarding Mythic Odysseys Theros, and Wes will be talking about big creatures and battlefields and taking a look over the wall at Magic and the Ikoria set. I saw Dan Dillon in chat as well, and if you'd like to take a look at one of his creature creations, you can look at the Dragon Rat in the current issue of Dragon Plus, always for free on iOS, Android, and online at dragonrat.com. So thanks again for everyone. Thank you to Jeremy for joining us in the dragon's tower. You got to watch out for the dragon behind you. He hasn't, the fires haven't reached you yet, but they look awfully close.
Now again, it's thanks to my Githzerai friend over here.
And his anti-magic sphere. I can only... No,
I don't even think that's anti-magic field.
All right, everyone, we're going to be tuning out, but we will see you next time.
Bye, everyone.